Hello, welcome to the video about common proposal mistakes. First thing I'm going to do today is give you some information about mistakes that I've seen that are very easy to avoid, that you can avoid during the exam. So first things first, make sure your proposal is in the right format. Hint, it's not a letter. So I understand that when you think about proposing something to someone, you think about communicating directly with them, and some of you chose to do this by writing an email or a letter, but a proposal is not an email or a letter. So what does a proposal need? It needs a title, it needs headings, and it does not need an opening or sign off. Okay, so no dear colleagues, no yours sincerely. It doesn't need those things. Okay, um, look at the writing tasks that we did and have a look at the proposal that you studied and really just copy that format. That's the right format to use. The other sort of second big common proposal mistake is make sure your proposal is not a report. So some of you decided that because you had to write a proposal to because you had to write a proposal about a team building exercise, you felt that you had to justify why the team building exercise needed to occur. And I understand that, but remember that you don't spend half or even 2/3 of the writing task justifying that. You don't need to detail every single problem that occurred. You just need to give a very, very brief description. It should be less than one paragraph, or maybe it is just one paragraph, and that paragraph is called, problems that we've encountered. That's fine, but then the rest of the text needs to move on to being a proposal. Okay, now let's just have a look at these verbs: suggest, recommend, and propose. Here are three examples of sentences with suggest and propose, but you could also use recommend in the same way. And they're not very well done. So let's try and improve them. To suggest you a program to strengthen the cohesion of your team. Here, I think what you're looking for is actually the verb recommend. Okay, so I'm going to recommend you a program to strengthen the cohesion of your team. Usually, suggest is used with that. So let's see how we can do that. I would like to suggest you to participate. Instead, you could say, I would suggest that you participate in blah blah blah, whatever that's about. Okay. If you really need the like, you can say, I would like to suggest that you participate, but I think it's, it's gilding the lily. There's a little bit too much going on there. Which proposed me an adventure team building program? Okay, so first of all, I think this person needs to use who instead of which. Some people who suggested that I sign up to an adventure team building program. That would work a little bit better. Propose, I mean, you can propose an idea, but it's difficult to propose a thing. Like, you can't, if you're sitting at a table and somebody says, do you want some bread? You wouldn't say that they proposed you some bread. You would say maybe that they offered you some bread. So they're asking you, hey, I've got some bread here. Do you want some? Okay. So maybe we can use offer here, but again, they're not offering you the program. I mean, you're not going to own the program. So they're just suggesting that you sign up to it, or who recommended that I sign up to this. You can also say that. Who recommended that I sign up to blah blah blah. Okay, now let's have a look at the linkers. So, a couple of mistakes with linkers. Now, specifically, we use specifically to give an example. So I could say, well, I've had a few issues with my teaching this year. Specifically, I didn't adapt it very well to the online environment. Okay, maybe I had some other issues, but specifically, that one's the one that I want to talk about. Now let's look at this sentence. Because the last 7 matches weren't won, players actually have overall... Okay, so there's a little bit of a word order problem there, but let's ignore that for a second. Players have actually overall lost interpersonal awareness and motivation. Specifically, okay, and when I see that specifically, I think that the writer is going to tell me how these players have lost interpersonal awareness and motivation. So my brain is thinking, okay, we're going to say specifically they have stopped talking to each other during matches. Yeah, that's a specific example of how they have lost interpersonal awareness and motivation. But instead, what they say is, specifically, although it is time consuming, it is time to put an end to this situation. And that makes no sense. The situation being time consuming it's not an example of how players have lost interpersonal awareness and motivation. So, if you want to keep this line in, you're going to have to find some other linker. And actually, I think you've got your linker right there. I think although is a perfect way to start this sentence. Yeah? That works just fine. Okay, so now that we've changed that, I'm putting that in green. Now let's look at especially. So especially we use it to give the best or worst example of something that we've done. So let's have a look at the first sentence. I feel that Personal Adventures Limited program as a one-day hike between mountains. It's more like in the mountains, interspersed with trust-building activities, is tailored to each player. Okay, that's fine. Especially, and now what I'm thinking is, okay, we're using especially, going to give us the best or worst example. Perhaps they're going to say, especially as our players love the outdoors, but I mean, it doesn't sound great. Now, let's look at the rest of this sentence. As detailed in your website, a good deal of real survival games, such as assault courses, is proposed. This needs to be are proposed. It's a plural. You've got an S there. And it doesn't really make any sense. Especially as detailed in your website. I mean, in your website, also, this is a problem because the proposal shouldn't be talking to the people who are offering the service. The proposal should be, an internal company memorandum. So shouldn't be your. As detailed on the website. Okay. I think again, this is a situation where we just don't need especially. You're not giving us the best or worst example of something. You're just giving us something else. You don't need to put linker upon linker upon linker. Okay, you've got as detailed on the website. That's fine. You don't need multiple linkers there. Doesn't make any sense. Okay, each week one of my team members, if it's one of them, that means there must be many. One of my team members skips a working day, as shown by the report I gave to Human Resources last week. Okay, so here the problem is that it needs to be attached to the rest of the sentence, yeah? Otherwise, on its own, it doesn't make any sense. Especially Sam and Mark Okay, and now we have a problem. Each week, one of my team members skips a working day as shown by the report I gave to Human Resources last week. The last thing we hear about is the report. But here, we're giving the best or worst example, here it's the worst example, of the team members, Sam and Mark. But because the team members is so far away in the previous sentence, it's confusing. We don't really know what's going on. Okay, so they often have strong disagreements, plural, at the office. So what we can do here is we can very simply switch the order around as shown by the report I gave to Human Resources last week. Each week, one of my team members skips a working day. And now we can say, especially Sam and Mark. We don't need a comma there. Especially Sam and Mark, because they often have strong disagreements at the office. Okay, that works. To the extent that, needs to mitigate your previous statement. So I could say, for example, the Centre de Langue has completely revolutionized its teaching to the extent that this was possible given the short time frame that we had to adjust what we were doing. So let's have a look at this sentence. It offers safe and non-discriminatory activities, for example, mountain hikes. Fine. I believe this is a great advantage for us to the extent that some students have health problems. Okay, very confusing. If we're using to the extent that, then we want some kind of mitigation. So I believe this is a great advantage to us to the extent that we will be able to take part in it given our budgetary limits. Okay, so up to the budgetary limits, this is a great idea, but beyond the budgetary limits, well, actually, it might be a problem. If we have to spend more, then we might not be able to do this, and it might not be that great an advantage for us. So we really don't need to the extent that it's not what we need here. So let's try and see what we do need here. I believe this is a great advantage for us. Some students have health problems which prevent them from doing extreme sports. I think given that, yeah, given that works here. Given that means étant donné que. So that works just fine. Okay, moving on to namely. Let me just put this in green. So, namely is used to specify what you're talking about. I believe it's a great opportunity to work on communication skills, namely capable of listening and suggesting projects. Okay, the problem here is that capable is a verb, and you can't have a verb after namely. If you're going to name something, you have to name a thing, all right? So what I would expect when I'm reading namely here is that you're going to name some communication skills. In which case, I think we could just delete capable of and say, I believe it's a great opportunity to work on communication skills, namely listening and suggesting projects. I mean, listening works, suggesting projects sounds a little bit weird, but at least here we have some gerunds, so they're verbs that are acting as nouns. If you really wanted to have capable of, you could insert being capable of listening and suggesting projects. So that being works there because it's a gerund as well. Alright, for instance is used to give an example. As detailed in their brochure, participants are led in a... Okay, well, they're led to a forest. I don't think we're walking around the forest with, you know, holding hands with the participant and leading them around. So they're led to a forest and must find their way to the nearest village. For instance, this experience will help players to develop 1P, their cooperation and community. Okay, this, for instance, doesn't make any sense here. If you wanted to keep the for instance, you would have to change the first sentence. You would have to say, as detail, or I think this, actually, do we even need that either? No, I don't think we need that either. Let's see, this experience will help players to develop their cooperation and communication skills. Your first sentence would be something like, I think this program will impart, or I think this program will be a great success and will give our players real life skills. For instance, this experience will help. But I mean, even then, it doesn't really work. I just think it's not useful. We don't need it here. Yeah. Just this experience will help players. I mean, it flows. It flows very well. It doesn't need a linker. Okay, that's all I have to say about linkers. Just remember, the most important part of this video is the first bit, common proposal mistakes. Make sure that if your exam question is a proposal, that you write a proposal and not something else.